Good afternoon, everyone. I'm your host, Malika Kumar. Thanks for joining us for an infrastructure automation day where we will share how to control the cost and minimize cloud waste. The presentation will be followed by fine wine tasting with sommelier Magister Dider Onro. He will walk through the tasting of wines and share some history about Two Sisters. If you have any questions, please put in the chat. Our speakers will address them at the end.
Well,
I'd like
I was gonna, if there's interruptions throughout, go for it. If you find something specific on the page that you say, how could you say such things, which I generally cause, you can put it into the chat and we can have a good discussion on it. So it doesn't have to be the end, but we'll take a look as we go through. So Malika, if you do see questions to us, just shout them
Sure.
out and we'll tackle them rather than make people wait when it's not relevant.
Okay, sure. So now I'd like to introduce the speakers for the presentation. Shlomo Bielak, Benchmark Corp CDO, who builds expertise to shift global markets and understanding how to make a transformational initiative scale without heroics. And Jim Sullivan, he's from HashiCorp, channel sales engineer. He's been involved in technical sales for longer than he likes to think and still gets a kick out of helping customers find their solution with the products. So now I will give the stage to Shlomo.
Actually, I'm going to give the stage right back to Jim. Just I'll give a little touch point here before we start. Jim is going to touch on many of the items, how HashiCorp has seen Terraform help save costs from traditional perspectives that we're very accustomed to. At which point he'll hand to me and I will show you new methods of turning Terraform into an engineered trade, and then how you can do that to achieve some serious amplification of those savings towards almost half of your operating budget in the cloud. And we'll talk about how to do that. I'm sure the chat window is going to go hot, as it did, as we've been presenting this across the globe and at universities to change how we do software development in non-production. So with that, Jim, I will get this started over here.
So Shlomo's driving for me, so we'll see how well he moves on the ping. But, so when you talk about cloud waste, kind of the first thing you start with is, what are you spending? And when I talk to customers about this slide, one of the things I want them to think about is, what are they spending? And in the public cloud, this is infrastructure. It's not the platform pieces; it's the infrastructure. It's the compute, not the service. It's like $64 billion in 2020. It's a huge number, and it's growing at a huge rate. And there's a lot of reasons for that. It's easy to consume. It's simple to provision. Once you kind of figure it out, you can do it really easily. But the problem is that once you start to do that, you discover that you're wasting these resources. And if we go to the next slide here, this number it's a huge percentage of that $64 billion number. It's almost $18 billion. And that's, almost a third. It's 25, maybe 30%. And you have to think about, where is that coming from? And I like to relate a story I had way back when I was learning how to use AWS. And I had done some stuff, and I was using all the free tiers because I'm cheap. And I got a bill from AWS, 20 cents. I'd spent 20 cents last week. And I couldn't figure out why I'd spent 20 cents. I'm like, what'd I do? And I went looking for it. It's 20 cents. It doesn't matter. But the next week, it was another 20 cents. And the week after that, and finally I was like, okay, I have to stop spending $1 a month. And this is US dollars. So I go digging into it, and I found out I think I left an Elastic IP allocated. I forget what it was. But it was because of the way I had deployed those resources by going through the standard sort of hunt and pick and turn on this and turn on that. I didn't have a way of turning it off. And while 20 cents doesn't seem like a lot, when you spread that across your organization and realize that it's not the 20 cents, it's $20, or maybe it's $200, all of a sudden you're wasting a third of your cloud spend. And this is the issue. And I think next slide we talk about this. where, you know, these the idle resources that you're not using, that's a huge hit. The fact that you've over provisioned things, another huge hit. Why do we over provision things? Because we don't know what we need, and we go for bigger. And when we think about how cloud resources are being provisioned and used today, oftentimes it's in a mechanism that doesn't enable us to put controls around that. The next one. So that spend hurts us. It makes it hard for our developers to take advantage of the resources they have and make sure that they're not over provisioning. It means that because we're provisioning our services and our infrastructure in a sort of an ad hoc manner, we don't have any way to apply governance. I can say to Shlomo, please don't deploy the extra large. But if I can't stop him from doing it, I know Shlomo, he's going to go do it because he needs that extra large. He needs it faster, better, quicker. And then all those resources just lie around. And
you mean a different Shlomo, right? Not the same one.
No,
right?
not you at all. But when they're lying around, right, they're just consuming. It's 20 cents a week. And that just builds up your costs. And so this is the problem that, you know, we're trying to address with Terraform and with infrastructure as code. So next slide. And really what Terraform enables you to do is very easily define the resources you're going to deploy them in a manner that includes compliance and governance, deploy them so that anyone can reach out and say, hey, I need a Kubernetes cluster, and you go, here it is. This is our corporate defined policy for that. And to do it across your entire organization. And when you're done, put it all away, destroy the resources, shut them down, and know that you have eliminated those wasteful resources that are running in your environment. So next slide. And so this is the workflow. And oftentimes a lot of our customers, and you may be using our open source today. I know a lot of people are because we have 100 million downloads a year of our products. And it's just, you know, there's people doing that today. But once you adopt the enterprise platform, either through cloud or self-managed, you can start to build on that open source infrastructure. You start to build up collaboration across your teams. You start to add governance and where you can start to control the size, to control the costs that are related to that. And you're able to actually define modules, define how we're going to build these pieces of our puzzle. And once you do that, you're really able to start to innovate. How are we going to drive our cloud usage in a manner that drives our business moving forward? And that comes around provisioning, that comes around availability, that becomes around management. And when customers do this, they see a significant ROI. All right, not everybody will see, you know, that level, but we know that when you put controls around what your developers or what your end users are doing, you can recoup those funds pretty rapidly, because now at least you have visibility into what's happening. Instead of, you know, enabling Shlomo to go and run up a $500 monthly bill just because he wants to, I can put controls that says, well, you have to justify that to me before I turn that on. Next slide. And, you know, this idea of reducing that cost, right? If you can get 20% of your bill back, that's a huge number. 20% of 64 billion is 12.4 billion. That's a great number to get back in. You can use policy as code to establish standards. You can start to eliminate some of this. And then finally, you know, as you scale up your cloud use, the policies and procedures you put in place initially scale with you. And so that 20% savings, you know, continues to be 20%, but, you know, 20% is more when it's 100 million than when it is 10 million. So that's one of the ways to look at it. So let's talk about a couple of case studies. Red Ventures, the great customers of ours, you'll notice 400,000 code runs to date. That's 400,000 times they have used Terraform to deploy infrastructure. A workspace is how they separate these different infrastructures, these different pieces. You have a workspace for a database server, and you have a different workspace for your web service and so forth. And then you may have different workspaces for the different teams. So your developer teams, even though they're using the same infrastructure as code definition, they have a different workspace, and with policy and governance, they may have different controls on that space. So those 700 developers can still use the same production code, but maybe not the same sizing on that. Whereas the production folks or the staging will have a different size. And out of that, they're saving a little over $200,000 a month. Silo is another really great example where they were able to significantly decrease the cost of their managed resources and increase the time it took for them to deliver that infrastructure. And so by focusing on how they're using Terraform and by automating the processes that they're doing, they were able to increase that productivity, have a common environment. They were able to use policy as code and auditing to reduce the risk associated with them. And overall, that all combines to reduce the costs. And so that's where we see Terraform as a great solution for when you're looking at how do I get my handles around this? You start by encapsulating with Terraform, and then you optimize.
Awesome.
That's it.
Okay, cool. I'm going to take some of the values that you have and I'm going to change them. I will postulate that we can move from the 20% savings to close to 50. So make it 7 to 8 million if you're running around 16 or so. I will also argue that take cleanup and say remove non-production. So I won't only clean up unused assets, idle assets. I won't even keep non-production systems. And we're going to show you methods a little beyond Terraform because we think that if you integrate Terraform and you deliver applications together through CICD, you can deliver the outcomes that are a little different. So if I want to achieve the removal of non-production, if I want non-production to become something I clean up, that Jim was talking about, cleaning up idle resources is key, but I can't do that if I do infrastructure. I can only do that if I deliver applications and infrastructure together. So think of Terraform being the right side on-demand environments using GitOps and Terraform to create automated infrastructure using pipelines, and application delivery, which is the common statement of I have CICD pipelines. If I converge the two together, I can then create systems and delivery and then say, I have wasted resources in non-production and wipe them out. This can be achieving new statistics. We took this from Gartner. Gartner has identified of that 16.6 spend, 44% of it is non-production systems. We're now articulating that if non-production is something to clean up, and they're 76% of the time idle. The idle isn't prod, by the way. The idle is in non-production. I'll wipe out the entirety of that 44% of systems when they're not used 76% of the time. And if I become efficient, they won't actually run, the rest of the 24%. They're going to run probably 5% or 10% utilization just to get confidence for production. So if cloud costs are the main driver of people not adopting it, 81% of people leave cloud because of cloud costs ballooning. We need to solve that, and I can solve that by changing how we do the SDLC. Cloud isn't always going to be cheaper. The analogy is very simple. If I leave a leased car in my driveway when I'm not using it, that's one of the silliest things you would ever have, right? Or even a rented car. You don't leave it there. I'm not using it. You only lease it or rent it when you need it. Same principles apply, or you'll pay more than if you had bought it yourself. It's pretty simplistic. This also affects your CapEx. If you're buying gear and I use the gear more effectively, I don't need to buy as much gear. So it applies to VMware. If I don't keep non-production systems, 44% of my capacity on my hardware isn't needed because I'm not going to be consuming it by idle non-production systems. Remember, if there's any questions, let me know. I know I'm getting to stuff people are like, just don't say these things. So if I re-examine how I do the SDLC, non-production provides zero Not a single percent of customer value. Nothing. It adds toil, it adds spend. Yet we keep it. We leave it sitting. We leave something that provides no customer value sitting, but it should provide confidence for production. How do I do that? I destroy it. That's the ultimate methodology for creating efficacy of a process, is I recreate that process every single time. And the only reason it exists today is the SDLC practices within the global market are completely ineffective and inefficient. And we're going to change that at Benchmark, because for our clients, we do the destroy stage. Here's an example of where we apply destroy. You'll notice the clock with the pop. It is clip art that I've created, because there's no such thing as clip art that shows destroying environments after you use them, for the reason, if I build and I'm done my build, destroy the build environment. If I test and I'm done my test, destroy the test. Same for performance or UAT. But you'll note we run a pipeline. The pipeline will build infrastructure using Terraform and do all types of other jobs in relation to the application, so that I don't have to keep the environment because I got the data I require. I know that's the real driver. Someone will say, I can't just do Terraform and destroy things. It's totally true, but I can, if I add the app, get the metrics for confidence for production releases. Then I don't need to keep non-prod anymore. And the underpinning for all the infrastructure orchestration is Terraform, but I still need to deliver my app. I still need to collect my metrics. I still need to do my testing. I still need to do my build. That's where the CICD pipeline comes. It doesn't have to be Jenkins. It can be any CICD pipeline. For example, we have two different CICD pipelines. You'll notice Terraform apply and build cluster, whatever you want to call it. You build the environment, you do all those cool things, collecting your testing, and then you add a destroy stage after you're done. Now think of this as everything does this step. There's 44% of your environment that doesn't persist and only runs when it builds confidence for production. I know we're just about running up on time, 4 more minutes, and then we can get to the wine. Okay, so a couple things that we should touch on that we found based on our own apps that we developed with CloudBees. We created devopseq, and we've been analyzing enterprises across the globe. And what it does is it tells us where human effort exists. Where does orchestration necessity, infrastructure orchestration necessity, like Terraform will enable, or application necessity from testing or build? And we found that while we think production is the heaviest lift, QA and the processes that QA have in non-production by far exceeds all the aggregated stages of development entirely. And of that percentage that we talked about, 44% of the spend, QA is the one that's consuming the largest portion. So if I do my app build, my testing, and my QA processes, I integrate that with a Terraform pipeline, I will achieve the ability to destroy my non-production when I'm done with it in the pipeline, because I have confidence for production. Confidence comes from QA. Confidence doesn't come from build. Confidence doesn't come from dev. It comes from QA. So QA is very, very important, but it's the least automated process in the globe today, which makes no sense to us. That's why we fix it. And then there's a few extra additional benefits. So this is the last slide before we get to the wine, just so everybody knows they can uncork or unscrew. Hopefully no unscrewing today. I'm hoping everything was corked. Here's some cool benefits that most people don't realize. If I destroy things and I don't persist, all non-production systems can mimic prod, because I'm not keeping it, and it won't cost me an exorbitant amount of money to match production. Now that's very important, because it increases confidence if you repeat the same process with a duplicated environment, because it's as close as you can get to prod. The second piece, the biggest issue people see when they do deployments is environment drift. One environment doesn't look like the next. It didn't look like it did last week because people have been playing with it. But if I destroy it and I recreate it, I have no longer an environment drift. This is the most common implementation of our engagements today. If I orchestrate infrastructure and I orchestrate apps, I can remove environment drift inside systems. And it's one of the biggest triage issues. You spend 20% or more of your time trying to triage why the hell isn't this working, because someone else touched the system and you didn't know it. One really unique piece that no one talks about, if you're a CISO and you're on the call, or you're part of a security division, if somebody took advantage of your system and you destroy the environment frequently, all malicious codes and events are gone with it. How do you take control of a software supply chain that persists for 15 minutes and then destroys itself? Pool wickedness that most people have never seen, but it occurs and it's very beneficial. And if people are following chaos engineering principles, we kind of argue that chaos engineering doesn't work really well because it's only sporadic touch points of issues. If I do full destruction and full recreation, it's the highest degree of efficacy for chaos engineering because I know how to recover from a total loss. Reduce day two toil. If I don't have non-production systems to maintain, I don't have to fix them. I don't have to triage them. I don't have to maintain them. I don't have an SLA. I just leave them as they are when they run, and when they're done, they destroy. DevSecOps kind of is forced into resilient manner. If I want to get systems to be destroyed, I need to do the shift left method before I do the destruction, meaning I need to know if my code is vulnerable or not. So it enforces DevSecOps as a principle. And then, oh yeah, we can reduce your spend by 44% overall. Your entire cloud budget or your refresh budget. You can cut your refresh budget by 44%. And then again, you could technically achieve 100% availability, contradicting Google's standpoint that that's not achievable. The reason being is if you're doing extremely resilient and repeatable methods, environment to environment, and destroying them frequently, you will achieve a state where perfection is possible. And architecture slowly becomes much more resilient in the same fashion. With that, I'll stop and I maybe pass to Malika to introduce the sommelier, so that people can enjoy after I've challenged our methodologies of SDLC and probably put people in an uneasy position of new methodologies. But we do this for our clients, so this comes from a customer practice. Over to you, Malika.
Thank you, Jim, for the presentation. Now, so the presentation will be followed by fine wine tasting, and I'll give the stage to Erica and sommelier Magister Dider Onro. He will walk through a tasting of wine and share some history about Two Sisters. Over to you, Erica.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm not Erica, I'm Dieter, but Erica is here with me, and she's taking care of things behind the scenes. But welcome, everyone. I am Dieter. I'm the estate sommelier here at the winery. And on behalf of everyone at Two Sisters, including the Two Sisters themselves, because there really are two sisters, I want to say that it's our pleasure and our privilege to be a part of your afternoon today. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Two Sisters Winery, but along the way, we're going to taste a couple of great wines. I do just want to suggest to you all that we have a relatively small group here. I don't think it's necessary to really have everyone mute. I want to keep the floor very open. If you have some questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. I've got the audio turned on here. You can also use the chat. Erica's here with me, as I mentioned, and she will harvest any questions that you may have that way, pass them along to me. We want this to be interactive and fun for you, so please feel free to get anything that you're wondering about out there. So again, as I mentioned, we are here at the Two Sisters Winery. I am in the barrel room. What you see behind me is authentic. Those are barrels, and they are full of wine. And it's really something that I'm very proud of as a member of the Two Sisters team here. We are a relatively new winery. We only opened our doors in 2015, and in a very short period of time, we have gained a tremendous amount of not just national but international recognition as a winery for the quality of our wines. While I talk a little bit about the history of Two Sisters, I suggest that we all pour some wine. I know you may not all be opening both wines tonight. For those of you who are, that's fantastic. Happy if you join me. But I'm going to talk about them in succession. We're going to start with unoaked Chardonnay. Looks like this. It's the one with the screw cap. So please join me in opening your wine. We're going to pour a little bit in our glass. We're going to have a toast just to get things started. Then I'll tell you a little more about Two Sisters, and then I'll talk a little more detail about this Chardonnay. So please, everyone, join me in tasting the 2017 unoaked Chardonnay from Two Sisters. Cheers. So I hope you enjoy that. I'll suggest that you just keep sipping on that wine, and we'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. I want to tell you a little bit about the history of Two Sisters. As I mentioned earlier, there really are two sisters because we are a family-owned winery, and the sisters are actually the daughters of that family. They are of Italian heritage, and they really love wine. And frankly, their objective was to make wine. And I always make that distinction because they weren't so much interested in being in the wine business. They are in the wine business because that naturally goes with making the wine. But in reality, it is their passion for wine that drove their interest in creating a winery. So they searched for the right property, the right location for many years. Ultimately, they found this property in 2005, negotiated for about a year, and purchased it in 2006. It's unique because it's located in the Niagara River appellation, a very special little section of the Niagara grape growing region. We are very close to both the Niagara River and Lake Ontario. So we have two large bodies of water that moderate the temperatures here and give us subtly different growing conditions, which lead to superior fruit, which translates into great wine. After purchasing the property in 2006, the family planned the estate. They planted the fruit here on the estate in early 2007 after removing the peach trees that were on the property. This was actually a peach orchard when they purchased it. So the first grapes were actually harvested to make wine in 2010 because it takes a few years for vines to reach the point at which the fruit is considered to be appropriate for making wine. We want a certain level of concentration and flavor, and that only happens once the vines have established themselves in the vineyard. And so in 2010, grapes were harvested and a small amount of wine was made. It was made at another winery because the winery on the estate wasn't actually built until 2012, completed in late 2014. And as I mentioned, we opened the doors of the winery in 2015. In a very short period of time, we attained a tremendous amount of recognition. In 2018, after only 3 years, we were selected as Canada's best small winery. And thereafter, we continued to garner all kinds of awards and recognition, high scores. And most recently, this year, in fact, we've gotten some more international recognition. Our barrel fermented Chardonnay was selected as a gold medal winner at Chardonnay du Monde in France, arguably the world's most prestigious Chardonnay competition. And then more recently, our Lush sparkling wine was actually selected as a gold medal winner at the World Sparkling Wine Championships in the UK. So we're very proud that the winery has attained this kind of success. And frankly, I attribute that to the family's dedication to doing everything to the highest possible level here on the estate and at the winery. Those of you who may have been at Two Sisters know what I'm talking about. The vineyard is manicured. The winery building is really incredible, designed by an Italian architect and very dramatic in the center of the estate. Everything we do here is taken to a very high level. Our restaurant is incredibly popular and has gained, again, a tremendous following and recognition from critics and food reviewers alike. The wine, I've talked a little bit about that, but I think now it's time to really talk about this in more detail. And let's come back to this 2017 unoaked Chardonnay. We call this unoaked because it is made in a stainless steel tank. So it never sees a wood barrel like the ones behind me. And that's important because we're really looking for, in this case, a very pure expression of the Chardonnay grape variety. That means we're going to smell and taste things like pear, Macintosh apple, ginger, and spice. And I say those things, and I know many people immediately wonder, well, how do those flavors get into the wine? Well, they get into the wine from the grape. Grapes are unique in their ability to mimic many, many other flavors from other fruits, vegetables, and various things that really we would never expect to come from a grape. But it is something unique that Mother Nature has given us. And so when grapes are crushed and go through fermentation, we see them develop all these other flavor characteristics. And that's what makes wine really intriguing, interesting, and delicious. So the first thing we want to do when we're properly tasting wine is to make sure that we are using our nose. And this is because our sense of smell as humans is actually quite limited. Humans actually only taste 4 things: sweet, sour, salt, and bitter. That's it. Everything else comes from our nose. And this is why it's so important to engage our nose in anything, any situation when we are drinking or eating for that matter. The more you smell things, the more you're going to be able to taste them. It's like your nose adds all the color to the black and white of your palate, if you will. But the key thing is to just make sure that we give our sense of smell an opportunity to really engage whatever it is that we're going to drink or eat. And in this case, it means just a few sniffs of this wine. And I say sniffs because your olfactory gland that you actually smell with is right here, right in your nose. So you don't really have to inhale. What we're trying to do is just get our olfactory gland in contact with the beautiful aromas that are coming off this wine. So don't be afraid to stick your nose in the glass, just a couple of sniffs, and you're going to pick up those beautiful fruit characteristics that I talked about. And you're immediately going to get some of those ginger and spice notes. So that's the opportunity for your nose to send a signal to your brain, tell it what to expect. But there's also a direct connection between your nose and your palate called your retronasal passage. And some molecules of whatever you smell actually travel via that passage into your mouth. And so even though you haven't actually tasted any of the wine, you are tasting it because it came from your nose. And this is another reason why it's so important to engage your nose in the tasting. But once we've done that, it's really time for the main event and actually tasting the wine. We always want to make sure that we hold the wine in our mouth for 10 or 15 seconds. And this is, once again, akin to anything that you're drinking or eating. More time in your palate is really great because it's going to give your taste buds the time they need to really connect with whatever you are drinking or eating. So let's take a mouthful of this wine, keep it on our tongue, get all of the flavors that this wine has to offer, but also pay attention to how the wine feels, the texture, mouthfeel. So again, everyone, cheers. Join me in the 2017 Unoaked Chardonnay from Two Sisters. And don't be afraid to move that wine around. It's great to get wine to come in contact with all the surfaces in your mouth. Of course, the top of your tongue is where all your taste buds are. So that's kind of the primary area that we're trying to contact. But beyond that, you know, the top of your mouth, your gums, your cheeks, that's where you're really going to get a sense of all of the beautiful texture that a wine has to offer. And we call that mouthfeel. And in this case, this is a very rich wine. It's got nice weight, tends to stay on your tongue. You can feel it in your mouth. You know, I'm talking, but I'm still tasting this wine. And especially those ginger and spice notes, they're really prominent as the wine kind of lingers in your mouth. We call that the finish, the end of the tasting. For me, it really tends to come through at the back of my tongue. That's where I feel it the most. There's also a subtle bitterness that is always reminiscent of citrus zest to me. And it really tends to stay for a long time. And we've really hit on three of the most important things that we're looking for in a high quality wine. We want beautiful flavor, we want exceptional texture, and we want a nice long finish. We want that wine to last as long as it possibly can. We want to get the most out of every tasting that we do. And so those are three aspects that we really look for in every wine, but most importantly, three aspects that you're really going to experience with both the wines that we're going to have today. The other thing about any wine, of course, is food pairings. So you obviously want to ask the question, what can I have this wine with? And in the case of an unoaked Chardonnay, it's a very flexible wine. For those of you who may enjoy shellfish, I really enjoy this unoaked Chardonnay with things like oysters or clams, really delicious. It's a wine that works well with a range of cheeses, certainly younger cheese. You could do soft cheese like a brie. You could use a younger cheddar with it, or really any cheeses that are young. And I say young because at that point they haven't really developed those dominant flavors. And just a point on food pairing wine, you want to make sure that the wine and the food are at about the same level of weight and intensity. And by weight, we're talking about richness, how full and flavorful is the food that you're having, because we want that to be on par with the weight of the wine. And then intensity, how strong are the flavors? How prominent are they going to be when you put them in your mouth and on your tongue? Because you don't want, for example, really spicy food to overwhelm a more delicate wine. And so just a quick thought about the weight and intensity of both the wine and the food. It's going to give you a clear indication of what's going to work with what. In terms of other foods that you could have with this Chardonnay, then I like sweet seafood meats. Try things like shrimp, crab, lobster, anything like that. And so those are more mildly flavored meats, but they have a beautiful, rich texture and flavors that you're going to find are going to work perfectly with the character of this Chardonnay. And then beyond that, of course, things like white fish. You could even have some salmon with this in a more simple presentation. You could do chicken of all kinds. Roast chicken will work really well with this wine. And personally, as we come into the holidays, I think this Chardonnay, because it has great weight and character of flavor, I'd have this wine with turkey as well, especially the stuffing, all of those beautiful herbal notes, even some of the sausage meat notes in the stuffing, depending on how you make your stuffing. You're going to find that this Chardonnay is a great choice. So I hope those of you who are tasting it are enjoying the Chardonnay. If you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them at this point. Well, I'll take that to mean that everybody's enjoying the wine and doesn't have anything that they want to ask at this moment. So I'm going to open the 11th post, which is the red wine that we're going to taste today. Now, 11th post is a blend of the three grapes that we grow here on the estate in Niagara-on-the-Lake. It is 48% Merlot, it's 13% Cabernet Franc, and it's 39% Cabernet Sauvignon. And what that translates to in terms of the wine and what you can expect here is complexity. And that's a really important word in the wine world, because complexity means that there's going to be a lot of different flavors that we're going to experience when we have this wine. And that, frankly, is the reason why blends are so popular. At the LCBO here in Ontario, for example, blends are the #1 selling category of red wines. And that's because people really love to connect with all the different flavors that they have to offer. And it stands to reason, when we put three grape varieties together, we're going to get lots of different flavors, because each of those grape varieties brings particular flavors to the final wine. Now, it's important to know how this wine was made, simply because that's going to help you understand why it's so complicated and it has so much to offer. Each of the three grape varieties spends about 2.5 years in a French oak barrel, like the ones I'm standing beside here. So that's 30 months of time for the individual grape varieties to mature into the particular wines that they are capable of making. Then those wines are tasted, and we go through blending trials to see exactly what proportions the winemaker wants to use in order to make this 11th post blend. And he'll take different proportions of each of the 3 grape varieties. They'll all be tasted blindly. And I say blindly, we don't, and I'm part of that tasting panel, we don't necessarily indicate what the blends are, but we look for particular characteristics. In the case of 11th post, we want the wine to be very smooth, very approachable, and frankly, very enjoyable. And so we take the blend that we feel meets those characteristics best, and then the winemaking team goes ahead and blends that on a larger scale. This is what resulted in those proportions that I talked about earlier. As we pour this wine and we actually go to smell and taste it, you're going to get the translation of those 3 grape varieties into the wine itself. And if you smell it with me, you're going to pick up the beautiful fruitiness of the Merlot. And this usually comes first because fruit is right on the surface. You're going to smell things like black cherry and plum, a really beautiful combination of fruitiness. In behind that, we're going to get some of the earthiness that comes from the Cabernet Sauvignon. Now, Cabernet Sauvignon is the most planted grape in the world. People love it, and they love it because of that earthiness. And it's this incredible character of things like leather and tobacco, leaves, fallen leaves in the fall, and we sometimes call that forest floor. There's a fresh but earthy kind of aroma that comes up from the soil in the fall, and we taste that in Cabernet Sauvignon, and it's really beautiful and enticing. In this case, there's also a note of black licorice, which is really beautiful and again, very inviting in the final wine. And then finally, we get this beautiful spiciness that comes from the Cabernet Franc. And it's going to come through here as more subtle notes of things like roasted red pepper. There's some white and red peppercorn notes in here. And there's only 13% Cabernet Franc in this blend, but that's because Cabernet Franc can really dominate a blend if you're not careful. And while we wanted the nuances of that spiciness, we were careful not to put too much of that Cabernet Franc into the 11th post. Now, we've smelled the wine. I think it's time that we taste this. This is going to be a very noticeable transition from the unoaked Chardonnay that we had before it. So the first mouthful is really going to be familiarizing your palate with this wine. A smaller mouthful will do just fine here. And it's going to be the transition from the white to the red. Then we'll come back and we'll do a second mouthful to really taste this wine and understand it. But let's taste it first. A small mouthful. Cheers, everyone. The 2017 11th post from Two Sisters.
Hi, Dieter. There's a question for you.
Of course.
Someone is asking about any malolactic fermentation in Chardonnay. I feel some roundness.
Yes, that's a great question. So malolactic fermentation is a secondary fermentation that can be induced by the winemakers, and it is intended to change a very harsh, naturally occurring acid called malic acid into a much softer dairy-based acid called lactic acid, and that is malolactic fermentation. Yes, in the case of that unoaked Chardonnay, there was about 50% malolactic fermentation done. He wanted some of the rich, creamy notes that the lactic acid brings, but in behind that, he also wanted some of the character that comes from the malic acid to be retained. He's trying to build a complicated layered wine that has a lot of different flavors and textures to offer. And so good pickup on the tasting. And yes, about 50% malolactic fermentation. Now, I hope everyone enjoyed their first mouthful of the 11th post. As I mentioned, you're going to see a really great transition there from the white wine to the red wine, totally different character in red wine. One of the most noticeable things that we get with the red is the tannin. Now, tannin is something that we get from the skins of the grape. It's a naturally occurring compound, most commonly recognized in spinach. For those of you who like to eat raw spinach salads, for example, you're going to get a lot of tannin, and it's a slightly gritty compound in its natural form. It's something that is in the skins of grapes. It's one of the things that we want in wine because it adds texture. It's also a natural preservative, so it's great to have in the wine. But it's also why we give the wine here at Two Sisters that extra time in barrel and bottle before we release a red wine, because that allows the tannin to soften. And that's really important because as young wines will often be very harsh because of how the tannins behave in those wines. Older wines that have had an opportunity to evolve and mature just get a much rounder, richer mouthfeel as a result of those tannins. So that's what we're going for here. And hopefully it's something that you already noticed on your first tasting of the wine. But now that we're going for our second mouthful, we really want to, again, take a bigger mouthful, keep it on your tongue, in your mouth for 10 or 15 seconds, really get a sense of everything that's going on, the flavors as well as the texture. Then we'll swallow and we'll talk a little bit more about the wine and its particular characteristics. So cheers, everyone. Enjoy the 2017 11th Post. So really beautiful, juicy fruit notes, and they tend to come through first. Hopefully you're all picking up those beautiful, earthy, spicy notes that come from the Cabernet Franc and the Cabernet Sauvignon. The other thing about the Cabernet Sauvignon that you're probably starting to experience now is that it really contributes this incredible chocolatey finish. And it's like a dark chocolate, you know, kind of 80%, great cocoa notes, but really comes through again on the back of the tongue and kind of lingers, contributing to the finish, but also great flavor. The spiciness for me really kind of stays on the palate as well. And those subtle peppercorn notes that I alluded to earlier, they really are there, and they contribute to the overall impact of this wine. Great texture, great mouthfeel, nice long finish. Again, all the things that we're looking for in a well-made wine. Here at the winery, in our restaurant, we use this 11th Post as a recommendation for all of our red sauce pasta dishes. You know, tomato sauce tends to be kind of acidic. We put all kinds of herbs and spices in there, so we really tend to amp up the flavor. But there's a beautiful harmony that arises between a long simmered tomato-based sauce and a nice red wine like this 11th Post. The herbs and spices in the sauce tend to work with all of those, that backdrop of flavors that we talked about in the 11th Post, the spiciness, the earthiness. And then, of course, if you're going to add some meat, some meatballs, some sausage, anything like that, you're going to find that this 11th Post really connects with all of those flavors as well. It's a wine that obviously is going to work with red meats. If you're grilling or doing anything like a roast, a stew, you're going to find that the 11th Post works really well in those situations. For those of you who are maybe looking for a vegetarian option, something that I always like to recommend is a portobello mushroom burger. Love portobellos myself. If you go out, you can find some really nice large portobello mushroom caps. Take those, marinate them. Even something simple like a little bit of olive oil before you grill is going to enhance the flavor development in the portobello. Really nice, dark, intense, earthy notes that you get, that mushroomy character. put it on the right bun. You can dress it with some great cheeses, depending on your preference. And of course, any of the condiments that we would normally put on a burger. Personally, I really like some grilled onion rings or something like that. Finishes it off, great flavors. And you'll find that the nature of the flavors, the earthiness of that portobello connects beautifully with the earthiness of the wine. Cabernet Sauvignon tends to take on a bit of a mushroom character itself. As I talked about earlier, it's got that earthiness. And so the portobello is really a match made in heaven for the 11th post. Red wine, great to choose for cheeses of all kinds. Now you can move to some older cheeses, things like an older cheddar, for example, has more flavor, might have been a little too strong and have dominated the unoaked Chardonnay that we had earlier. But now that you've got a red wine, it's a great choice. This is also an opportunity to use something like a Stilton, where you've got a blue vein cheese, some really nice saltiness in the cheese that's going to work exceptionally well with the red wine. And it's worth saying, it's a bit of a generalization, but it really suits in this case. Red wine loves salt. So I confess, while I love sweets, I don't have a real sweet tooth per se. I love savory foods and I love salty snacks. So anything like salted nuts, potato chips, popcorn, corn chips, you name it, you're going to find that it works really well with red wine because the salt tends to soften the tannin, makes the wine smoother and more drinkable. And at the same time, there's just an affinity of the flavors in most of those snacks that works with all of the elements of a complicated and layered red wine like this 11th post. So I would strongly suggest you try that. Next time you're getting that bowl of potato chips, pour yourself a little bit of red wine, maybe some 11th post later tonight, and you're going to find that it's a great pairing and a great way to enjoy red wine in general because of the affinity that those foods have for the red wine. Are there any questions that I can answer about the 11th post or anything else at this point? Okay, I want to tell you very quickly, because people often ask, where does the name 11th post come from? And it's an interesting story that goes back to that first harvest that I mentioned earlier on back in 2010. When it was time to pick the grapes, the family was very excited to come and participate in the harvest because this really was the realization of their dream. So they came, they helped pick the grapes, they watched the grapes be crushed and the fermentation start, and they all had an incredibly enjoyable day. They finished 10 rows at the end of that first day of harvesting, and really to commemorate that, they carved their initials in the next row, which was the 11th row or the 11th post, if you were counting into the vineyard, to commemorate that first day of harvesting fruit and seeing wine being made. Fast forward to when that wine was finished and ready to be named. Because it's a blend, they couldn't just put the grape varieties on the label. They had to give it a name. They all agreed that that first day of harvesting fruit, watching the wine being made, was the realization of their dream. And so they decided to name the wine 11th Post to commemorate that first harvest. And so now 11th Post is always a blend of the 3 grapes that we grow on property and always serves as a reminder of that first harvest and really the infancy of Two Sisters when it first started. So I hope that you all enjoyed the wines. We are not in the LCBO or any of the provincial liquor stores in Canada. So the best way to get our wine is to go to our website. The wines are all available there. If you want to have the wine delivered, you can order 6 bottles and the delivery will be free. Anywhere, and that's in the province of Ontario. Anywhere else in Canada, if you order 12 bottles or more, the delivery, the shipping charges will be free. We have also arranged for a promo code for you to use. So if you're ordering wine on the website, you get to the checkout, There'll be an opportunity to enter a promo code, and if you type in benchmark, you will get a 10% discount on your order. So with that, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to be a part of your program this afternoon. Thank you so much for enjoying our wines. And I do hope that we'll have the opportunity to meet at some point. Please come to the winery. It's an incredible estate. I would love to meet you in person. But in the meantime, thank you again, and please stay safe.
Thank you, Dieter. Thank you, Erica, for such an illuminating session on two wines. Thanks for joining today, and I would like this conversation be going, and please reach out if you have any questions for Shlomo and Jim. I will send a follow-up email with the presentation, and we will also share the recording. So if you have any questions, please let us know and keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining everyone today. I hope you enjoyed the wines.